everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics, brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guests are the team supreme behind a previous favorite in The Unbeatable Squirrel Girl and a future favorite in the upcoming graphic novel Danger and Other Unknown Risks. It's Erica Henderson and Ryan North. Thanks for coming on.
Hello.
I am also here.
How is the day starting for you two? Ryan, are you doing well over there?
It's going well.
Erica, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing fine. Yeah, it's a busy day, but they're all busy right now.
We're here to talk about Danger and Other Unknown Risks, your upcoming graphic novel from Penguin Workshop that you two wrote together, and Erica did all the art for, including coloring and lettering, I believe, with assistance on the lettering from Laura Prescott. It arrives on April 4th, so we're recording this just under a month out from release, although this will hit the day before it drops. Here's the solicit for it. I'm going to do the whole spiel so you don't have to.
Please.
Here's the deal. On midnight of January 1st, 2000, the world ended, but it wasn't technology that killed it. It was magic. Now, years later, the Earth is transformed. Magic works, sort of. People are happy, sort of. But this new world isn't stable, and unless Marguerite de Pruitt and her canine pal Daisy do something about it, it'll tilt into deadly chaos. Good thing they've been trained their whole lives for this and are destined to succeed, or so they think. I just want to start with, I absolutely love the book. I've actually read it twice just so I could be appropriately prepared. It also felt like a book that I should read twice because there's a lot of things being kind of seeded early on. Before we get into the story behind it, I have to ask, one of the things is, Erica, you said you're busy. How's the build up to release been? Are you doing a lot of press right now?
We're doing a lot of things like this, that I've contacted some local bookstores, but it's not a ton.
No.
I would say. I mean, it's not severely interfering with my life. It's an hour here and there.
You're not doing Danger and Other Unknown Risks press junkets where Ryan dresses in a tuxedo?
No.
Sadly not. I
think that would be a good look. I think that'd be a lot of fun, but it's kind of an interesting book to talk about, I imagine, because it's very, I don't know. I'm not trying to make it seem like this is like an episode of Lost or something like that, but there's a really quick path to spoiling things that are really important to the story. And because of that, I imagine, I don't know, I'm sure you're going to find this as you get closer to release, but I imagine you're going to be finding yourselves scrambling to find new ways to say the same things a lot, just because you don't want to kind of get into some of the spoiler territories and you don't want to get into that, even though I want to ask a ton of questions about that.
Yeah, I mean, we literally had phone calls about how are we going to talk about this book when that time comes, because it is going to be hard to discuss this book without getting into where we wind up.
I think it's sort of the first thing we've done that has the plotting is really important to the characters and the characters really important to the plotting, and there are twists and turns, reveals, and I don't want to spoil them all, so you're sort of left being like, it's really good, trust me.
Please read our book. We like it.
It's kind of interesting that you went from working together on a Marvel Comics book to something that's totally your own. And Marvel Comics, I think people are constantly fearful of spoiling stuff. But I mean, I guess Squirrel Girl, it wasn't like a spoiler book. It wasn't something you'd really have to worry about that, because it wasn't you're not participating in big crossovers where you're killing supervillains or something like that. It's just people hanging out.
Yeah.
So one thing I find fascinating about Danger and Other Unknown Risks is how it flips a lot of the expectations readers, or even people who do what I do, have on their head. In our minds, or at least a theoretical idea of a comic reader, comics typically start with the writer, and artists are typically the people who draw the pictures, not write the words. But in this case, both are untrue, because you both wrote this graphic novel together. And Erica, at least from what I understand, you were on board the foundational project that became this project before Ryan was. Our typical guesses are just wildly inaccurate here. I want to start with that. What's the pre-Ryan origin of this book? How did this project originally start coming together before Ryan jumped on board?
That was basically someone else brought me in to work on a couple of graphic novels at Penguin, and then they flaked for 2 years, and I told my agent, I'm not going to do this anymore. I don't care. And he talked to Penguin, and Penguin said, oh, if you want to bring them a different book, you can hold on to your contract. And so then I emailed Ryan and said, do you want to do a book? It can be anything we want. And he said, yes. So really, there wasn't like a foundational book. It was literally me going to Ryan and saying, hey, I have this contract and it's to do whatever. at this point, basically.
I didn't know that was an option, that you could like sign a deal for a book and then just not write the book for a couple of years. I felt like I've been too good with my deadlines if I could have been doing this the whole time.
I mean, presumably that advance got paid back because nothing ever happened. I know that like that contract got canceled. That other one that was not mine.
That's wild. So Ryan, what was the appeal of signing up for this initially? Did it all really just come down to working with Erica, or were you just like, I don't understand how this contract works. I gotta understand this.
No, it was all about Erica. Because I mean, you get was it an email or a call, or you get a message from Erica saying, "Hey, do you want to write a book together? All the ducks are lined up. We just have to make it happen. We can do whatever we want." Like who's going to say no to that? So it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, the contract part isn't that confusing. It's literally just like, Penguin will publish a book from you, and then once we figure out what that is, like we'll hash out any other details. But yeah, that's like that part of it's pretty boilerplate.
From what I understand, I think, Ryan, you said in an interview you two had kind of carte blanche to do your own thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about kind of what went into developing this, you agreeing to do a book and to doing this. So you two had carte blanche to do your own thing. Your initial pitch hit. And from what I understand, it was way, way different than this book. I read it at one point. It was a detective book, from what I understand, which, these things evolve. But then months later, you two checked in with Penguin Workshop with an early version of Danger and Other Unknown Risks, which was way different than what you originally pitched. I'm curious as to what the process from, Erica emailing to kind of having the idea together was. Like, how and why did it go from like a detective story to concept D is for Danger and Other Unknown Risks? Was the initial pitch just not working, or was it you two on the phone chatting and just slowly gravitating towards something different? We'll start with you, Ryan.
I have to go back to what that initial pitch was. I think it may have been a collection of short stories or something. We had the writer, we had the contract. So it was just a matter of filling in those blanks. We quickly came up with something, got the green light, and then realized this isn't working. Let's do something else.
That was actually this, but the idea was to present it as if they were disparate stories that by the end kind of come together.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that sounds like me. A little formalist. Soupçon there.
So is it kind of like the chapters were each presented as their own short story to some degree?
Yeah, it was like, here are the same characters and they're having different adventures. And by the end, it would sort of reveal itself as to be one story in one quest.
Okay.
And then I think we were trying to work on that, and we were like, this is hard.
So you kind of gradually like hammered it until it kind of became a single narrative where you kind of connected all of those things just into one narrative?
Well, we had a lot of calls, and Erica reminded me yesterday that one of the things I kept pitching, I think as a joke, but there has to be a talking dog in it. Eventually we're like, you know what, let's just we're going to put this talking dog in, Ryan. You seem to be really obsessed with this. And I remember, without spoiling much, one of the origins we had for it was having this call about what we like, what we don't like in stories. And I was going on this rant. Basically asking Erica to explain America to me, where I was like, you are a country founded explicitly on rejecting divine rule. And yet you have all these stories you love as a culture about people who deserve to be in charge based off the accent of their birth. Star Wars, stuff like that. So how do you reconcile this, Erica? Explain it. And she was like, I can't explain America to you. And I was like, well, I hate that idea that it's special based on birth, who you are, what your fate is, you're chosen. The whole chosen one thing rubs me the wrong way. And we started thinking, oh, well, we could tell a chosen one story in our own way, where we're sort of exploring what it means to be chosen and how that changes you and all this sort of stuff that ends up in the final book, but not have it be just this, you're great because you're fated to be great sort of storyline.
It is kind of funny though, because like as soon as you kind of insert the talking dog, like you can't do like a Hugh Grant, Julia Roberts romantic comedy with a talking dog in it. I guess it depends on this. Yeah, I guess you can.
Yeah, no, we totally could.
You could. But I kind of feel like as soon as you have the talking dog, you kind of have to have a reason to have a talking dog. And I imagine that kind of shifted that in the chosen one. It's like that kind of starts maybe like defining the shape of what you're working with. I don't know. Did it?
At this point, it's so hard to remember where the chicken and the egg were,
The chicken and the talking dog.
We we really just went through so many things. Like we were just spitballing and then like throwing stuff out and spitballing again. It was just this constant back and forth until we finally found this nugget. And I really think the talking dog helped shape the nugget. I think that is correct.
Yeah.
But after that, yeah.
Ryan, you made a good choice by recommending the talking dog because it was a very consequential talking dog.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know. I think it's really interesting when you're facing that blank sheet of paper, right? Because when we're working on Squirrel Girl, we knew we had the character there. We had met the world and everything else, but we had something to start with. This was completely open. And having that foundation of a talking dog, if that's not too much of a mixed metaphor, it ties in nicely. And I'm not sure which came first, where we were talking about a talking dog and Y2K, but something really appeals to me about having a Y2K disaster be not what you're expecting. You're ready for some date overflow, and you get magic comes back to the world and cannot be controlled and starts destroying things. That felt like, I want to hear that story. That sounds really interesting. And that appeals to me as a guy who went across the country fixing computers for Y2K when I was in high school or undergrad.
Okay, I have to ask, you know computer stuff. What would have happened if we hadn't fixed the computers?
Okay, so how much time do you have?
Okay. Give me like a 1 minute TED talk, because I'm just curious, because it's interesting that, like, I don't know, would magic realms have opened up? Would we? I mean, is this a possibility? I don't even know. Did we avert this disaster? Is this an alternate history book, actually?
Okay, short form, 1 minute. The issue we have as a culture is that people understand things through metaphor and movies, and so in movies, when computers malfunction, things go bad quickly and dramatically. In real life, planes are never going to crash out of the sky. You'd need to turn your computer off at midnight. It would just be some accounting errors. And if you want to experience, there's a Unix overflow bug happening in 2032, I believe, which is a similar sort of thing. But we were never in any danger of things exploding. There was just a bug that needed to be fixed and some annoyance in fixing it.
Basically, one of the things that actually did happen was like the registers at a Godiva store stopped working. It's stuff like that where
I need a sliding doors type movie made about what would have happened if those Godiva cash registers did not stop working. I mean, that could have been immense. I'm really nervous about Y2K32 now, though. So there's a lot coming, but
something to look forward to.
Yeah, it's interesting that the idea that we kind of perceive things like through movies, like that is actually, I think, relevant to this, because not just movies, but other stories, because like the Chosen One thing is so important to this book, because Marguerite de Pruitt is a chosen one, and she has her teammates on this quest to save the world and everything like that. And so this is not only a chosen one story, but it's also the two of you confronting what you don't like about chosen one storylines, which I think is a great concept, and B, kind of a fitting one in a society where, that idea is about as big a fantasy as anything and also constantly used. I'm curious as to what specifically made that such a foundational hook for the two of you, beyond the fact that you were wondering how America works.
I feel like you brought up Star Wars, but I remember us seeing at least one of the new movies together and being like, we're just like came out ranting. We were so mad. The two of us were just like going on for a full hour. I think it's a topic that we're both into, but I don't remember how it blossomed. Do you, Brian?
No, but I feel like there is a joy as a writer to say, here's something I don't like, and now let's use it and make it into something that we can enjoy. I'm making it sound like an intellectual exercise when it wasn't. We were both sort of finding the story ourselves, but it made it a bit more interesting to me, where we're starting with this trope that we think is tired and not great, and then trying to transform into something that we're both excited about and could tell us this really interesting story. That's like catnip to me. I love that sort of thing. I love a restriction, says the guy with dinosaur comics, where it's the same pictures every day for 20 years. I find that interesting.
I've seemed to remember, now that we're talking about it, that early on it had slightly more of a high fantasy flair. So leading into these kind of tropes, I think, made more sort of formal sense.
Yeah, I can see that.
I have a bunch of drawings of Marguerite in like fantasy costumes.
I love it. So you're having all these phone conversations. You're kind of bringing these pieces together. What was the process to getting to the actual scripting phase? From which I understand there was about 20 something drafts in the actual scripting phase. So it seemed, I think what I'm getting at is like there was a real evolutionary process to this story. Like, what was the process to getting to scripting? Because it seems like you kind of want to have all these details, the talking dogs, the Y2K, the chosen one, all that stuff kind of buttoned up before you start scripting, because otherwise, I don't know, you don't really know what you're aiming at, I guess.
Yeah, we had the characters in the world and sort of the rough shape of where it would be going. And then I sat down and I wrote a book with a bunch of different chapters. There was one, it was way more formalist in places. I remember there's one chapter where it was going to be done in prose and they would escape the prose, just like some writer stuff that I enjoy that maybe would not be the most interesting thing to read. And we did this process where then I would send it to Erica and she would revise it, and not just revise it, rewrite it, cross stuff out, throw away entire chapters, change the story. And then she sent it back to me, and I would do the same thing with her. And this is a process that we were saying before, like, you cannot do this unless you absolutely trust and love each other, because it's so vulnerable. Like, I've written something, and Britt's saying, no, I like none of this. We'll do this instead. And you go back and be like, okay, well, some cool stuff there. But what if we did this instead? Like, it's collaborative and generative, but it produces these 20 different drafts where you're moving towards something. I've never worked that way before with anyone. I don't think I could have done it with anyone other than Erica. We'd already spent 5 years working together on Squirrel Girl.
Well, I think originally you were just going to write it, and it came back, and I was like, something feels off. Can I make some changes? And you were like, sure. And then when I changed something, I was like, well, this doesn't, if I change this, and and then I just gave you a new script. And then you were like, okay, well, these things need to change now. And like, David, you were talking about how, like, okay, you need to go into the script with all these things. And like, a lot of those things came in later.
Yeah.
Like Y2K, I think, came in later. I think that was more like, hey, it would be fun. Because I think in like the first draft, it was like 200 years in the future. One thing like, I can definitely say is that like, Jason is not a character.
Yeah, I guess that's true, because it's like, I imagine in the process of kind of ping-ponging back and forth and kind of figuring out what's working about each script, you start realizing, you're looking at Ryan's script and you're like, maybe, X is missing or Y is missing. And then Ryan looks at what you're doing and he's like, oh, where's Z? Where's Q? And then like, you kind of keep going back and forth and you're realizing that like little elements are missing. That's one of the things I think is interesting about this process is I imagine a lot of the process of making a book this way was like, alternately expanding the story and simplifying it at the same time. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Absolutely.
Yep, absolutely.
I imagine, you trust each other, but did it take a lot to get used to, or did it feel pretty natural working together that way?
I'll answer that one.
I just don't remember.
Yeah, it felt pretty natural once we got into it, because whenever I'm, writing a script for someone else, I'm always saying, like, this is not a order, this is not a recipe, do whatever you want, mix it up, like this is a collaborative medium, let's collaborate, let's do this. I'm not precious about it. And so when Erica wrote back, was like, hey, I changed this, and also like this character now survives and all this stuff has changed. I'm like, this is cool, this is like the next level of what we've been doing before. And so then it sort of unlocks this process of let's ping pong it back and forth and then see all these different things. So I really like how it is such a collaborative project that is something that I could not have done on my own. I don't think Erica could have done it on her own, but it's something that comes out with the two of us.
Didn't you write a Choose Your Own Adventure book once?
Twice.
Twice. It was Romeo and Juliet, and what was the other one? I'm trying to...
To be or not to be.
Yeah.
Shakespeare. Yeah.
I think you kind of accidentally wrote a Choose Your Own Adventure book that only Erica was aware of being a Choose Your Own Adventure book, because she found the direction she wanted to go with this. And it worked out. It's a great book.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. That's really cool.
The stupid way that I'd put it when we last talked about, I guess yesterday we talked about it, was our book is like Blade, where we got to negate all of each other's worst tendencies. We have all of the strength, none of the weaknesses.
I was really expecting a Tremors reference there rather than Blade, but I don't know how I'd work Tremors into that.
No,
can't do it. I do think it's funny though, because that line that I came across with the 20-something drafts was in a Popverse interview, and it had a preview of the first chapter. And Erica, you said that that first chapter over all those drafts really didn't change that much. And I think it's interesting because in my mind as a reader, the opening chapters and like the ending would likely be the hardest part of most books, and that like the ones that would probably change the most and be fine-tuned the most, because like the open is the foundation of everything you really need to button down. I'm curious as to like what made that one work from the get-go. We'll start with you, Erica.
Well, I think part of it is that the opening chapter just really establishes like, here are these two characters. They're on an adventure. It is dangerous. There is magic. They're friends.
Talking dog.
And starting in, media res is always exciting as well. Really, like, there were just sort of minor edits to dialogue, maybe to set things up later, maybe because something was clunky and just had to get dropped. But like, it as a setup, because we don't want to give anything away in chapter one, I think we both were like, this should just be like, bam, we're in it. Magic, wizards. There we go.
Straight fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then that way we could mess with it immediately afterwards and be like, oh, you thought this was a regular, wizard adventure. No.
Can I tell a funny story about the ending without spoiling things?
Oh, please do.
Like we said at the beginning of this, it was a contract that Eric had made in the past. I show up. And one of the drafts, I wrote this ending. I thought it was super cool. And then we get the note back from the editor, like, this is pretty violent and horrible and gruesome. Or what is a YA comic? And I was like, yes, I was aware that we were doing a YA comic from the start. So let me go back and change this. When I was not aware, I was just writing in what I thought would be interesting. I didn't realize it was YA. And most of my tendencies lean towards that, where like everyone keeps their clothes on. People don't swear that often. So it fit nicely into that bucket.
Uh-huh.
But I didn't realize that was what we were shooting for until I'd overstepped this in this dramatic conclusion and was told what genre we were working in.
Oh my God.
Well, I mean, to be fair, we came into it with like literally blank slate. Like the original contract was for like middle reader. We knew we weren't doing that.
Mm.
Oh my. That's amazing. That's amazing. And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. The comics crowdfunding platform Zoop is stacked with some great campaigns in April, with Mark A. Nelson's fantastically beautiful sci-fi story Thunder Hunters, a wild project from up-and-coming Italian artist Marco Fontanilli that you'll have to see to believe, and the Won't Back Down anthology spearheaded by the legendary Trina Robbins to benefit Planned Parenthood. There are other live campaigns and some huge launches coming in May to sign up for, so check out zoop.gg for more. It takes less than 30 seconds to sign up, and the e-commerce style checkout is streamlined and intuitive. Add multiple rewards and add-ons into your cart, provide some info during checkout, and you're done. No confusing additional steps in finalizing your pledge, and no post-campaign surveys. For all of you creators looking to crowdfund your project, Zoop is currently open for submissions. Email them at hello@wearezoop.com to start a campaign. And now, back to the show. I do want to say, though, about the fantasy start. The real thing that throws you off, though, and in a good way, I say throw you off in a good way, is there's kind of a chapter 0, if you will, which is a shopping scene.
Yes.
And I just want to compliment you two on that one, because from the very get-go, it had me speculating from the jump. Like, it had me like, okay, what's happening? And then I flipped the page, and I'm like, I have absolutely no idea what's happening. I was like, I had all these theories, and then I was like 2 pages later, and I'm like, I don't know what the hell's going on. I'm just along for the ride. Let's see what's happening.
That's exactly what it was supposed to do.
I think the prologue changed a bunch. Like, we knew what it was going to be. It was exactly that scene, but there were so many minor details as things changed later. We were like, okay, we got to shift this around. It was like, oh, well, this, Bernard as a character has changed. And that was a funny one, because like structurally, those 3 or 4 pages never changed, but we kept changing the dialogues. It was like, well, we've updated this, so that's got to go. And that's because that's one where it's foundational in a different way than chapter 1 is.
How many times did you change the movie that you used for his reference? Was it always Deuce Bigalow, male gigolo?
Yes, that was Erica's idea from day one.
Because I wanted it to be trashy, and I also looked up what movies were out in December of 1999.
I'm not proud to say it, but I did see Deuce Bigalow, Male Gigolo in theaters, but I was also 15, so I'm pretty sure I was the target market. But I do love the idea that this book opens where this man like seemingly knows that society is going to collapse because of Y2K. And one of the big recommendations he has for another human being is to go see Deuce Bigalow, Male Gigolo.
I have not seen it.
You've not seen it?
I have not seen it, but it seemed like a thought-provoking choice in the way that it, confused you.
I mean, if you said like The Sixth Sense, I would not be asking this question. So good job by you with Deuce Bigalow.
I didn't realize you'd never seen Deuce Bigalow, Erica.
I don't know.
Don't do it.
The way you suggested it, you were like a #1 Deuce Gigolo fan.
I was slightly younger, but also I never got into the raunchy comedies.
Sure.
You were more of the Paul Blart Mall Cop generation.
I haven't seen that either.
Not a big Segway fan.
Encino Man? Where do you land on this?
Oh, it was 1999, so there were so many good choices. Like, you could see Blade, or like The Matrix, or The Mummy. And like, no, Deuce Bigalow.
I mean, it is the perfect choice. I mean, I love the fact that I don't even know if this counts as a spoiler, but I feel like Deuce Bigalow is like plot related in a very unique way. Like it ties in the end, and it's funny because it doesn't tie in the end, but it kind of does. I'm not going to go any further on that, but I love the fact that when I reread it, I'm like, Deuce Bigalow makes way more sense now. So one thing that I read about that first chapter, though, is when you were doing it, Erica, you laid out that first chapter art-wise to get a sense for kind of like how everything's going to look and flow and move and everything like that. But I'm curious as to, this was before you wrote the majority of the rest of the book. I'm curious as to how like getting a visual sense of the story and kind of like how Marguerite and Daisy move and everything like that. Do you feel like that changed the way you wrote the rest of the book going forward?
I don't know, because I'm generally thinking pretty visually when I'm putting together a script. So I try to keep in mind a certain level of like push and pull when it comes to motion, and like having the quiet moments and like the little beats and making sure things that like move quickly in other places. So I think it was more just as we understood the characters better that changed things, but I don't think that the opening changed it too much. Also because the opening is a chase and they're the ones being chased, the speed is not dictated by our protagonists. Like the pace of things is dictated by our antagonists, and so I don't think that affects how those characters move as much in a visual way.
Sure. Does that change things for you at all, Ryan? Because I don't know, I imagine like if you're writing like Fantastic Four or something like that, and you see the art come in, like maybe you might shift how like you're kind of going to script for the person because now you know a little bit more about them. Does that change things, or you already had a good sense of Erica, so it really wouldn't affect kind of how you think about writing this book?
Yeah. I mean, it helped knowing Erica already and knowing how we worked together. But the real advantage we had was that this wasn't Fantastic Four where you have 20 pages every month. You need to get a certain amount of story in there. You have to have a satisfying chunk of story. With a graphic novel, people who are reading it they've bought in for the whole thing. And so you have room to pace things, let them breathe, have this chase last as long as we want it to, and not realize like, I've got 4 pages for a chase at most, and then we got to move on because I got to hit these beats, hit these marks. So it was really nice to get to work with Erica on sort of that larger canvas where we had room to spread out a bit and let things live more in the moment.
Yeah, I think the only places we had restriction was our self-imposed restrictions with like, okay, every chapter is going to have a big, like almost full page opener and 1 panel. And then every chapter ends on a like almost blank page with like 1 panel. And then there's like 3 pages in between each chapter. So those are the only like real restrictions we had, and we made them up ourselves. So it's fine.
I like that having this space allows you to do things like this is a genuine compliment. This isn't like me making a joke about how you use this character, but Mr. Toadsworth the Third. Mr. Toadsworth the Third is a toad, a frog, who Marguerite and Daisy use to like test the environment by like, let's say, sending to Mr. Toadsworth III in through flight, tossing the frog to see like, is this going to be something that's survivable for them? And there's like multiple pages in the book where they're testing the environment by having Mr. Toadsworth III go in. And every time he shows up is an absolute delight. And it's really fun. And it's funny. I also just really enjoy saying the words Mr. Toadsworth III because it implies multiple generations of Toad, which we, spoilers for the ending there might be. But at the same time, it's nice that when you get that space that you can kind of, I don't know, like luxuriate in a scene and kind of like there's a scene with Colin Ewers, a character who is a farm boy, and like you get to spend more time where where characters are sharing time with each other. And I think that is the stuff that kind of gets us more invested in the world and more invested in the characters and everything. Did you find that you really enjoyed kind of digging in on scenes and getting more out of it in that way?
Yeah, absolutely. I think especially with Colin, the relationship that he has with Marguerite, don't want to spoil anything, but it's central to a lot of what's going on. And Mr. Toadsworth, like there's no less of a character with the Toad, but it shows you like how Marguerite and Daisy react to the Toad and what they're doing, what the world is like. And it was less of, oh, we've got lots of pages, so let's fill it out, and more of, we can write this the way we'd want to and not have to go back and say, man, we got to cut 2 pages from this scene. Because you're right, like the first thing you would cut, David, is probably the scene with the Toad. Because it's not, you can get there faster, more efficiently, but you lose the sense of place and culture and personality that you can otherwise have access to, and you have space to really like live in the moment. So I guess I would describe it as a luxury. It's something you can't normally do when you have such a hard page limit, but when you have more room, you can really use it to make the book better than what it would otherwise be.
Yeah, and I'm just a fan of these sort of slow moments in general. Like that's really where a lot of character takes place, because you get to, like we said, you get to sit with people and you get to really be with them without having to move on to the next thing. Like it's not just reaction, it's them getting to do what it is that they want to do in their own time.
Yeah.
I think, so, yeah, sort of going back to what we were saying about that first chapter, where like that first chapter is largely reaction, which is, I think, partly why it didn't have to change too much. It's like, okay, we know what is happening and they just need to not die. Whereas with Mr. Toadsworth, you're just having a good time with a frog. Yeah.
Well, and I imagine that impacts your art too, because I want to bring up one of my very favorite random things from the book. There is a scene in the middle. I'm trying not to spoil things, but let's just say there's a place where there are goods.
Well, I can see you. Why don't you just show me?
Well,
because people aren't going to be able to see this.
It's
okay. Yep.
Yeah. Well, I didn't want to describe it because I didn't want to spoil the location, but there's a scene where there's multiple panels of Marguerite and Daisy engaging with like goods, and in one panel, this tiny little panel, Daisy sees a bone, and then in the next panel, Daisy's walking up to Marguerite with the bone in his mouth. And that's the type of thing 100% would be cut in like a monthly book, because it's a battle for time and it's a battle for page space. And if it's not relevant to plot, then it's not necessarily valued. And that's not me condemning the form, because I love it. But at the same time, it's one of the natures of how that stuff works. And that's one of the things I really love seeing your art in like longer form stories, Erica, is it really underlines kind of like what you value as a storyteller, where you value things like that happening, or like the sequence of Marguerite pulling Mr. Toadsworth III out and then chucking him. It's not just like one panel, it's 4 panels and then a throw, and then Mr. Toadsworth III flipping over and over, and like those things.
Yeah, there's like 5 panels of him flipping like end over end.
I mean, I imagine that affects your art quite a bit, of like how you're going to approach little story beats like this. Is like you get to expand on things you wouldn't necessarily get to expand on if you were working on like a 20-page monthly or something like that.
Yeah, and like even with those 20-page monthlies, though, I would sort of force those things in as best I could. I remember like in the very first issue of Squirrel Girl, like Ryan and I didn't really know each other yet, because we didn't know each other before the book started. And there was a scene towards the end when like Craven, I think, has tippy toe or something. I don't remember what the context is. I just remember this one bit. And Squirrel Girl yells, "Put the squirrel down." And I was like, no, that is 3 panels. And that is the sort of thing that like I will always try to force in, because I love, like, if you just put all of those in one panel, you're kind of made to read them a certain way. It's just as one solid sentence. Whereas if you break it up, you're like forcing people to stop, because there is that panel gutter that like is a literal hard stop between moments. And I love forcing people to feel time when they're reading a comic.
And there's a lot of that in this book. I read a lot of, I don't want to say battles, but like conversations with the publisher being like, okay, we're going to break what you are commonly seeing as the rules of comics here with the way these balloons are going. They're telling you how the people are speaking and how these lines are being delivered and what their delivery is. And that's going to involve overlapping balloons and sentences not getting finished, and like balloons just ending as they're being interrupted without any sort of punctuation there, because the balloon is telling you the punctuation. We don't need a ... when being covered up by another balloon. And like all that sort of stuff is stuff I love, because it's stuff that comics can do and that prose can't. And it makes it feel to me like this is a capital C comic, because it's living in that medium like it was raised there, and not like it was I don't know, an illustrated story or something else. I like when comics are comics.
Well, specifically for me, the whole like overlapping word balloon thing is kind of where the text becomes a part of the art and part of the movement, because like you can get that across in prose. Like you have what the and then a hyphen, and you know the person's been cut off. But if you put what the and then a hyphen inside a word balloon, and then put another word balloon like underneath it neatly, you're describing something being cut off without visually showing it, when you can just visually show it. Like that, we're in a visual medium, so why are we using textual cues to describe something that like you can just draw when we're drawing?
Yeah, I mean, thought balloon or speech bubbles and everything are visuals, and it's I don't know. I am interested in how having control on all the aspects of the art impacted your art, because it seems like you're not just putting words into balloons. You're thinking about how that's going to impact the visuals too. Like, did you find that handling all aspects of it really impacted your approach on this book?
Yeah, I mean, part of the thing that it got me thinking about a lot more when it comes to lettering and how you can work with it when you're, designing it from, you're working with, like, you can put together the script or change the script to make it work, or like all the way to the end. It is even, we talked about the word balloon overlapping thing, but then there's just little stuff like you can, because you're moving the eye from left to right, that's how we read, but also we're looking at pictures, we're reading pictures, and then going back to like, reading symbols, aka text, with the pictures, you can line up the pictures and the text, even within a single panel, to be like, all right, we need to see this person first, and then the dialogue, because we want to see the reaction before we see what they say. Or you want to see the text first, and then the face, because like this text, if it's saying someone saying like, hey, you, and the person is turning around, you want to see the hey, you, and then the person.
Right.
As opposed to seeing a person turn around and then hey, you, even though they're in the same panel, like you're reading these things in an order, and being able to control even at that level is awesome.
I'm a terrible reader because I would just look at Daisy wherever she is on the page first. I was just my eye just gravitated towards the dog. Good thing I wasn't a cat, because I just would have just stopped paying attention completely. But I did want to talk about one part of the art that I thought was really interesting, which was that, with your colors, actually, it's like one of the things I think is interesting is like, I think going into the book, I kind of expected, because like the first chapter establishes that Marguerite only has one spell and it works differently everywhere. And that these like wizard folk are like incredibly powerful and just constantly zapping at all times. I kind of expected like each area to have wildly different magic and that to be a big part of it. But it seemed to me that the different I don't even know, what do you call them? Environments, realms?
Realms, yeah.
Realms, yeah, the different realms. It seems like the biggest things that changed realm to realm were colors and costumes, and not really the magic as much as their relationship and how they use the magic. I'm interested in how those different communities and those different realms like impacted your approach to the chapters, because it seems like each was almost more like a microcosm of how you approached the characters visually and from a kind of just an identity standpoint. Was that really how you used the realms in the book?
Ryan, you want to go?
Well, your coloring is so unique to each area of the book that we were saying the other day that like you could open up the book and tell where a scene is taking place based on the stories the colors are telling, which I thought was really cool. And structurally, narratively, this idea we had of each chapter being a short story in that we're not going to show the boring parts. So there's not a lot of, there is some, but there's not a ton of like, let's walk to this place. We're at the place and something is happening, which when you read the book as a whole, I think it gives it a real sense of forward momentum where you're seeing all these scenes throughout this voyage to save the world. And it really feels like these things are happening quickly and that there's exciting things happening. We gotta keep up, and less like, now we need to spend 5 days traveling to the next town. I don't know. I don't feel like I'm describing it very well, because there are good stories where you see that journey, but I feel like we're getting those character moments while we're there at the place doing the thing that needs to happen. So it felt, I guess, action-packed.
Sure.
In a way that term's not normally used.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think like it was more important for us to sort of establish kind of regional differences.
Yeah.
And the realm thing was a larger thing in an earlier version. And I think it wound up staying just because it was sort of another added level of chaos in the way that like life is chaotic. Like it's not huge. It's just that like, okay, here's another thing to think about
when traveling.
Yeah, it's like making sure you have all the like bus schedules if you have to transfer.
I think it helped make it feel lived in too, where it wasn't just like, all right, we thought of the story and there's different areas and blah, 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 because we had spent so much time talking about it and figuring out different ways and having ideas that were big at one point and then the volume turned down a bit. When we're doing the final version of it, like we know answers to all these questions that aren't necessarily still there in the book. So it made it very easy to show this world that felt thought through in the way that you normally don't get unless you spent 20 drafts talking about what could happen, what the world is like.
I'm just a big fan of that kind of world building because you get kind of tired of like, well, let me explain to you how the realms work. And it's like, I want to die. Whereas it's good to know that like it's good to know the world has texture and that, you know, these people know what that texture is and more or less how it works. And like, we are not privy to it, but yeah, in the way that you go to any new place and the locals know what's up and you don't, but like, that doesn't mean there's any mystery going on. It just means that like, I don't know where Waffle House is.
My primary concern when traveling.
And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. It's Bad Idea Comics, and surprising absolutely no one, the renegade director-retailer publisher that's always doing wild things is again doing wild things. Not satisfied to just drop comics like Matt Kint, Ramon Villalobos, and Tamara Bonville's They're All Terrible, or Matt Kint and Louis LaRosa's Megalith the old-fashioned way, they've continued to drop their Secret Six titles, or comics they make incredibly difficult to find by being sneaky about it, with Playtime, a new comic from the great Mike Carey and Jonathan Weishak that they dropped at Comics Pro. What might be next? Who knows? It's Bad Idea. They're crazy. Keep an eye out, or you might miss the next Bad Idea comic altogether. And now, back to the show. You know, I really enjoyed like some of the shorthand stuff that you would do, but also like kind of the empathy you had for the characters, like the Colin Ewers location that the people will discover when they read the book. Like the way that magic is used there is genuinely beautiful. It's really cool seeing the process of how the community uses it. But then you like the preceding chapter, I'm going to use your exact quote from the script. The preceding chapter is in a quote unquote, a wretched hive of scum and villainy. And And it's really interesting to see like the magic is mostly used to like mug people and like, well, at least in the main instance we see. But it's interesting too, though, because that you use that moment to like have empathy in the characters because like Marguerite understands where they're coming from. And then on top of that, it's also a really great time to challenge the chosen one, the chosen one concept because, you know, these people hear about her being like the chosen one and they bristle at the concept that this little girl is there to save them. I believe they put it. It's interesting. Like, I love seeing how each realm kind of acts as like this point where like Marguerite bumps up against and like starts learning more about the world and herself in the process. Like you two use that really well, like the environment and how like Marguerite engages with it. Not to say that Daisy doesn't. Daisy is very excited about the questionable sausages.
I mean, I think one of the things that I had said a bunch of times when we were working on it was that this is a lot of like going to college for the first time and finally meeting different people and being like, oh, so that's how it is.
I maybe don't have it all figured out. Kind of thought I did.
Yeah.
Well, I read in an interview that you see a lot of yourself in Marguerite, Erica.
True.
Yeah. I mean, how is she similar to you and like what went into building her out as a character from there?
I think it wasn't so much. I mean, I did wind up just drawing her like a little me, which is fine, whatever. But I think it was a lot of that part of it where you're going out and meeting people and deciding things on your own and just thinking about like, you know, how I had to do that, but also I'm sure everyone else had to do that as well. That was sort of important to me. And I think that sort of mixed in with the what was going on in the culture at the time, which is like, 2020.
Yeah. And
the amount of just sort of general thinking about what's going on in the world that people were doing.
I do think that I've accused myself of being a fairly simple reader in the past where I'm just like, ooh, action, yay. But there was a lot of really interesting stuff in here. And like one of the things you kind of touched on there is like you tweeted about this a while back. It was like Erica, you tweeted about how a big thing you two wrestled with in the book was the idea of, and I quote, building connections and looking forward even when there's no future in sight. And I imagine that was like a big thing in 2020 because like, when you're thinking about this book and like thinking about it through that environment, it's like, what does the future hold when we're in the midst of this pandemic? And I thought you two did that really well here, especially when, I mentioned Colin user community. I feel like you can really see like how you can kind of push back and you can make the most out of really tough situations. But why were those ideas such a focus for you two on this book? Is it because of the audience you're aiming at and the general state of the world when you were doing it? Or is it more based off of your own concerns?
One of the things that Erica mentioned early on that resonated with me a lot was this idea of disaster, where normally in a disaster narrative, something bad happens and then everything goes wrong and the world is bad now and it will never be good again. And this idea of, well, actually, when bad things happen, people tend to band together with their community and try to fix it. And it's like we, as a species, have survived a ton of disasters before. And it's only when you're in this position of like, I'm going to do it all myself. I'm going to build a bunker. I'm going to be a survivalist. And then when there is a disaster, you're afraid that people are going to come for what you have. And so then you need guns and you need to shoot them and defend your bunker. And it becomes this, libertarian fantasy of the strongest person with the most resources shooting down the starving hordes. And that idea of we have survived bad things before and we'll survive bad things again, I think is it's beautiful, and it's something you don't see very often because it's not sexy. It's the explosions and the disaster and man against man, woman against woman that is what's normally the selling point of a post-apocalyptic narrative. And it felt more honest to be like, yeah, there's a place where that could happen, but surely there's a place where we don't instantly kill each other the second the lights go off. Like, surely this idea of 3 meals between civilization and chaos, there must be some middle road there where we don't just instantly start devouring each other.
Yeah, and I think it also just really ties into our distaste for the chosen one, divine right of kings kind of narrative, because there's so many stories. I mean, just think about like the entire like MCU where like a bad thing happens caused by one person and then one person comes in and fixes it. And Like these things somehow affect everyone, but it's just one person against one person. Like it's not that simple. Like you said, it's not sexy to say like, well, problems are more complicated than that, but they are. And like, why shouldn't we talk about that?
Somehow it's always Tony Stark too. Somebody needs to do something about that guy. I guess they did do something about that guy, but
they kind of did.
Yeah, they did do something about that guy. Anyways, I do think it's interesting though, because you're talking about like one of my favorite parts about this book is it kind of it's not that it's necessarily about nostalgia, but it's about the need to like move on from the past and like the need to like make the best out of the future. There's actually a couple lines in the book I wanted to bring up in relation to that, because it's about how the modern times might appear to people who don't have our amenities. And I have to admit, I felt this quote. Marguerite says, all that time, they're like looking back on how the previous people lived, our society back in glorious days of Deuce Bigalow. Marguerite's looking back and she says, all that time people now spend making on shoes or wheels or bread or whatever could be used on art, science. That's why we're here, Daisy. We save the world. We give ourselves a chance to build all this all over again. And Daisy's like, truly, it was an age of giants. And all I could think about was Deuce Bigalow. I just...
Well, also, that was something where specifically, I remember this very clearly because we both talked about this. We both really wanted this in there. When Daisy said, truly, it was an age of giants, he's looking at a big mouth bass, one of the singing ones.
I missed that. I got to read it again now.
Like he's staring at like the stupidest thing you could buy.
Are you talking about the one that
1999
sings?
at yeah.
Yeah,
there was a singing Billy Bass, but like,
oh my God, truly it was an age of giants.
And so it was very much like this is all, look at all this great stuff.
Yeah.
Including this. Yeah. Look at how important this is. Because it's one of those things where, like right now we have a lot of like really cool stuff. Like, a lot fewer of us died in 2020 than might have had we not like figured all this stuff out.
Mm-hmm.
But also, they're singing Billy Bass. That's also a thing we have.
And now in 2023, I saw a guy who hooked up his smart speaker into his Billy Bass, so we can say like, "Hey Google," and the fish turns its head and answers, which is an age of giants. I want that.
I can't tell if that person elected to live in hell or if that's actually genius. It's unknown, but I have to admit, this is a terrible admission. The first time I saw, I don't know how you felt about it the first time you saw it, but when I saw Billy the Bass, I liked it. I was into it. And then every time after that, I was like, why am I... Yeah, there's a moment there. There's a moment there. But, it's interesting because, like, I feel like there's a lot of complexity to this book that, like, anybody can enjoy. And there's like, just... There's base level joy, there's great adventure, but there's like a lot of depth to it that I think you guys have really built in there. It's really interesting. Like this book is, it comes from Penguin Workshop. It's labeled teen and young adult fiction. And labeling is always really interesting to me because I feel like sometimes people would see something like this labeled as a teen book and it like is almost like a turnoff to adult readers because they're like, I'm not a teenager. Why would I read this? But I don't know. Like I did a podcast yesterday with Deb Aoki and we were talking about manga and why it's kind of hitting with everybody so much. And I brought up Danger and Other Unknown Risks because I feel like your book is definitely one that can speak to any audience. And I think it's because you put so much thought into it and because there's references to Billy the Bass.
We've generally like stuff that when you say all ages, like it's literally true. Mm-hmm. Like someone much younger can read it, but then someone much older can read it and be like, oh, hey, there's stuff here that like maybe a 5-year-old wouldn't understand, but 5-year-old can understand that like a talking dog is fun, adventures are fun.
Yeah. I'd say that's like the heart of it, right? Is you want it to be accessible to as many people as possible. And I think for me, for Erica, for a lot of people, there's not a lot of interest in talking down to a reader and saying, well, this is for someone who is 8 or 18. And so I know what they like, and they're not going to care about anything too deep. I'm just going to put in this and they'll be satisfied. Like that's not satisfying as a writer and artist. And when you ignore that and assume they're going to be smart, they'll figure this out. They'll be curious about it. You get a more interesting story out the other end, I think.
It's funny. We had the opposite problem with Squirrel Girl where it was labeled teen.
Yeah.
And a lot of people were writing to us being like, can kids read this? And we're like, yes, it's fine.
It is interesting. The labeling thing, I think it's useful for like like librarians and for like booksellers and stuff like that. But sometimes I think it kind of creates these like narrow views as to what stories can be when it's like, I don't know. I feel like Squirrel Girl's for everyone. I feel like this is for everyone.
Yeah.
And it's not that like saying teen doesn't mean others can't, but at the same time, it is kind of interesting where there can be that like sometimes narrow view where it's like, I'm not going to read this because this is for kids. The idea that it only belongs to one group. It really belongs to everybody.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I asked Marvel about that once. I was like, why is it T for teen? They're like, oh no, it's T for tween. And I was like, this is helping no one at this point.
But there's 2 T's then.
Wait, what?
I that's what I was told, that it meant T for 12 and below. It's safe for them. I don't know, man.
It's confusing. I do think that one of the smart things, I don't even know if it was like intended this way, but Y2K is such a perfect date because for a reader like me, I'm just like basking in like the Deuce Bigalow and Cannonball 2 references or Cannonball Run 2 references. And then like if you're, I don't know, 18 and you're reading this and you're like, Y2K, Cannonball Run, like what are these things? It's like it is kind of like a different world for you, and so it's like that. It's a perfect line of demarcation, and also like anybody that understands what Y2K was, it's just hilarious. And I don't know, good job by you guys picking that. I'm glad that sometime during the 20 drafts, you guys were like, this has got to be Y2K.
Thank you.
I think it was something like, it was fun to kind of make it a present day thing, like as a Zoomer, she would not have been around for Y2K, and to have that recent history there, it was sort of funny to me in the way that like when we were kids, that's when like that 70s show came out. It's like the exact same kind of timeline where it's like, the media is being made about exactly 20 years ago.
I like the idea of it, the dizzying sense that this is now a period piece when it's stuff that we remember from being a kid.
It is funny. Like I guess that's the thing is like storytelling is always on kind of like was it like a 30-year cycle basically? We're always like looking back, and it's very odd. But well, to close, I just want to talk about a few things involving your collaboration. Obviously, co-writing is considerably different than Ryan writing and Erica drawing, and like having the freedom to do your thing is going to be different than universal stylings of Squirrel Girl to some degree. But I don't know. I mean, you talked about the trust earlier, but how well do you think that, like, do you think you could have worked like this and made a book like this without having collaborated for quite some time on Squirrel Girl? Like, do you feel like that was necessary to kind of set the stage to be able to do something like this?
As opposed to, say, Erica being a complete stranger? We're doing the book together?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, if a complete stranger had thrown out so much of what I had written and been like, I wrote this, it's better. I'm not sure what my reaction would be, but it probably wouldn't be as positive.
Yeah, I think we needed to know that, like, for 3 years, Ryan and I had, like, the same kind of brain worms. I think back a lot to a dinner that we went to with our editor, Will Moss, and he told us, Ryan knows the story. So he told us, okay, we're gonna go to the Savage Land. We already talked about this, but we're gonna move it here, so you need to come up with a story because we want you out of New York when this event happens, so you don't need to worry about being part of the event. And we were like, oh, what's the event? And it was that New York was going to get covered in a dome of magic, and we just sat there being like, wait, so can you like use toilets still? Does water come in? Like, what's going on? Are people going to like slowly starve to death? And he's like, you guys aren't part of this. We're like, no, we need to figure this out.
Oh my God.
How is the water cycle working? Who's purifying the air? Cities rely on food from outside the city, otherwise they starve. So where's the food coming from? Are we farming in New York? All this stuff. They're like, don't worry, this is not your event. It's not happening.
They're like, this is why we're sending you to the Savage Land. Get out of here.
That's why you're doing 4 months with dinosaurs.
I'm glad that happened because otherwise we wouldn't have had a coding montage. I'm pretty sure that happened in that arc.
Yeah,
I was a very big fan of that montage. It turns out that coding montages are not the most exciting things that have ever happened.
It's funny you mention that because that is like an example where we got to spend a moment with a character in a 20-page monthly book. But because it's a comedy book, you can do it's almost like it's a joke, but also you're getting to spend time with Nancy and Doreen as they're programming and seeing what that's like. So you can still fit it in a monthly book, but it's a lot more work, and you have to like pick and choose your battles for that.
Yeah.
I kind of feel like Squirrel Girl was such an anomaly anyways, just because it seemed like you were able, I don't know, I'm not saying others can't do this, but it seemed like you were able to do a lot of things that other books couldn't. I mean, you think about the last issue, well, the first last issue you worked on together. What was it? Like the second volume, number 27, I want to say? And
31.
31. Ah, God. I'm going to have to turn my Squirrel Girl.
How do you not have that at the tip of your fingers?
It's terrible. But it's like that entire issue is basically like, you know, Nancy and Doreen existing in between moments. It's like an entire, like, it's them growing old together. And like, it's an issue entirely of the stuff we're talking about. And it's, in my opinion, probably the best issue of the entire series. It's fantastic.
No, thank you.
And I love that. But I have to say, it's funny, you talking about how you work together and Erica just like basically Xing out all your stuff. I was earlier going to make a reference
It
to...
wasn't all of it.
Have you ever seen Greta Gerwig's Little Women?
Yes. Love it.
It's fantastic. I just watched it recently.
I haven't.
Oh, it's so good.
And it's funny because your story about that just made me think of when, oh my God, I'm completely forgetting the name of the main character, but when she's like getting her first work looked at and the editor is just literally Xing out page after page. and she's just like, I have no idea what's going on, but as long as you give me money at the end, I don't really care. But also it's funny because I was going to reference Little Women earlier. Apparently I just have Little Women on the brain because there's a character in that is referred to as Daisy against her will. And I was like... because I'd watched that after I read this book for the first time and they said Daisy, I'm like the dog? Daisy the dog has apparently polluted my brain to the point where I think anybody named Daisy is now a dog. Sorry, Emma Watson. My apologies. So to close, Ryan, you're writing Fantastic Four and a mess of other things, assuredly. Erica, you have Parasocial coming later this year with Alex DeCampi. You're off collaborating with others now. It's clear that you guys are friends. I mean, you saw and debated Star Wars movies together. You had dinner where you discussed the inner workings of how New York would continue to operate with a magical dome over it.
It wouldn't.
It wouldn't, precisely. It's clear that you're not just collaborators, but friends. Like, do you imagine that, I don't know, I mean, is it your hope to continue to kind of come back and work together from time to time throughout the rest of your career?
I'm sorry, I'm laughing at the idea of just answering up being like, no, absolutely not.
That would be amazing.
This is it.
It's like, I've learned that I don't like being edited by my collaborators, so I am out.
We're done.
We're done. This is it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to do something like this again. This story is a complete story, but I'm sure if we had a great idea for a sequel or something adjacent to it, I don't think either of us would be like, no, I think I'm good for Erica for the rest of my life, or I've had enough Ryan to last me the next 80 years. I think I'm good. So yeah, I mean, hopefully Erica's not going to say the opposite, but I think it'd make a good team.
This is the moment of truth.
I'm going to make an announcement about my future with Ryan North right now.
It's like in college sports where they like declare which college they're going to go to, and they like just select a hat. You have to select one with Ryan North or no Ryan North on it.
Yeah, I'd love to. I'm someone who likes working on a variety of things, so I think it made sense for me to just immediately go on to doing like the complete opposite kind of book where the relationships are terrible and everyone's just in one space the whole time. But yeah, and then I'll after I get that out of my system, I'll be back onto this sort of thing.
You know, I have to ask about the timing of this because I mean I know that book market books have like a much more prolonged period to release. Like I imagine you've been done with this book for a while, right? Maybe? We
finished around this time last year.
Okay.
I want to say.
Yeah. And it's interesting because in my head when Parasocial was announced this week, I was like, holy shit, like how did Erica do 2 books in like 1 year? And then I was like, oh wait, I bet Danger's been done for a while now. I mean, it seems like it makes you look incredibly prolific having 2 graphic novels in the same year though.
That is true. That is true.
I think you're pretty fast at what you do. If there's ever a sequel on there, I need to know what's going on with all the Mr. Toadsworths. I mean, we got to have a Mr. Toadsworth like legacy story where we're like the entire lineage. How did the 4th one get a hat? These are important questions that are in my head. How does the hat stay on his head?
The thing I like about Mr. Toadsworth being the 3rd is that it does imply that some of the realms are dangerous. We never get to see it, but like there are 2 dead Mr. Toadsworths. Let's not like beat around the bush here.
Yeah, Yeah. You know what? As I have a second in my name, I am a second. So I feel for the previous generation. That's where my real connection with Mr. Toadsworth comes in, because I'm a second and I know that one's gone. Rest in peace, Mr. Toadsworth the second. Anyways, well, that is all I have for you. I cannot believe I'm ending on Mr. Toadsworth the second, but that's what we're going to do. Erica, Ryan, thank you so much for coming on to talk about danger and other unknown risks with me. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Our pleasure.
That was great.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with Erica Henderson and Ryan North. You can find them on Twitter and Instagram, as well as their work in the soon-to-be-released Danger and Other Unknown Risks. Also, big thanks to Deanna Chapman for editing this week's podcast. If it sounds better than usual, it's because of her. Love Off Panel, want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts today and give the show a rating or review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can also support the show by backing on Patreon. Find the show at patreon.com/offpanel. And when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast, as well as weekly content and more. Want even more? Subscribe to my subscription comic site Sketched at sketch.com for long-form articles, interviews, and the rest of the site's content. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by following on Twitter and Instagram at @sketchcomic or following me at @slicefriedgold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Darcy Van Polges, Kevin Bides, Tom Evans, Natalie Mockery, Travis Gibb, Reed Beeman, Kelly Sudaconic, Max Wood, Jeremy Lambert, Brian, Christo Ray, Nir Levy, Dennis Hoffman, Jason Hussa, Cancel Comics, Kieran Gillen, Jonathan Kent Uratam, Henry Johnson, Django Boren, James Steiner IV, Chris Langford, Jason Wood, Tom Beachy, Ben Damstead, Rom V, Nick Walker, Patrick Coyle, Isaac Oren, Scott Carpenter, Rent Narb Studios Comics, Capes and Tights Podcast, Klaus Vandeven, Brian, Submen Industries, Jack Mulqueen, Carl Kerschel, Robert Massell, Elza Chartier, Luke Nakashoji, Dr. Luke, Scott Hazelwood, Canadian by Proxy, Bradley Rader, Carl Choi, Brandon DePillis, Patrick Brower, Declan Shalvey, Dan Garino, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein Q, Nick Bennett, Birdcage Comics Cafe, Susanna Polo, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, Andrew Carita, Matt Mahoney, Stephen Hall, Philip Myra, Christian Shelton, Chris Pachala, Torrin Grunbeck, Fuzz Bubbles, Chris Rata, Transmitter Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Akil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Wesley Gift, Sean Kirkham, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwan, Vita Ayala, Akil, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, David Kelly, Nick Polito, Matthew Groom, Jason Massey, Adam Bogert, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Brawley, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Colin McMahon, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Adam Highfill, Fiona Staples, Mark Abnett, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comic Star in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Wolfpack for letting me use their song Outro as the song's opening theme, and to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's outro and ad music just for the show. Check out both their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.